Welcome to tonight's broadcast of Universal News Tonight from the Emmy Award-winning station here in Hartford. Having been recognized as having had more carnal knowledge and relations with Emmy than any other news team here in Connecticut. Attention passengers, the destination's the same, the maps change. After they had been standing for some time silently out in the human field with nothing going on, local conditions finally turned to the representative Life had sent and said, "I'm not really clear as to what's supposed to be happening. Are we here to hold a burial or to conduct some sort of award ceremony?" And the representative patted his hand down in the air and said, "Shh." One man said to no one in particular, "Hanging around civilians makes me nervous." And his partner quickly added, I believe what he meant to say was it makes him edgy. The background to the many myths regarding man being held in some type of captivity is that early on in this part of the galaxy, life stabilized the man creatures by developing in him an intellect composed in large part of the same ingredients as in flypaper. Now for some more of the history left out of the history books. Once Jehovah had decided to leave, he told man that he was bringing someone new to take his place. Then he went in the next room, put on some glasses and a fake beard, came back in and announced that he was the promised replacement, Siggy Freud. But some amongst the mortals were not that easily misled, having already been through similar incidents wherein life had local conditions, take certain players off the field, change the number on their jerseys, then send them back into play as though this somehow made it a whole new ball game. A certain man once wondered, even if some of what life does to man seems to be in the form of some sort of humorous legerdemain, if you're within a closed system and can see only that, and can thus see only the inside of the system, you're left forever perceiving the setup to the stunt, but never realizing the magic of the trick itself. How to develop a mind that's sane and stable? That's easy. Just think the same things over and over for 60 or 70 years. If your desire to be right in an argumentative sense is greater than your hunger to know, then you never will. A man wrote the Enlightenment Doctor, "Dear Doctor, how come so much of what's said about achieving a higher state of consciousness is said in a negative sort of way? You know, like how you'll never achieve it if you continue to do this or that sort of common human thing. You know this sure can be discouraging when you're hit with it over and over again." Okay, if the doctor had replied, he would have noted that the whole scenario the man described takes place in a person's own nervous system and not in any profitable outside thereof. So there. If Euclid be the food of love, a poem. The simple think in straight lines, the sophisticated in circles, while the actual more complex take their burgers plain. Papa, I have a stomach ache. Well, son, I guess you ate too much. No, Papa, I don't think it's the matter of food as much as it is my stomach. And the elder had himself a grin as he realized that their many discussions at the kitchen table had not in vain been. After learning of what great assistance is the bacteria naturally in man's intestines to the process of elimination, one man decided it would then be good to add some agent of deterioration to his mental operations. But then realized that such was already present. But just not being used in the exact manner he envisioned. On one world is a legend that says that everyone is born with a given number of hours to live, while a competing tale claims that a favored few are instead born with a given number of words they have to say. Dearly, semi-beloved, we are gathered here today to ask ourselves whether we would prefer to die or to shut up. One man left written instructions that flowers should not be placed on his grave, but rather his tongue. Yeah, I know. But beyond all that, you've still got to consider that without words, no progress. But without no words, no super progress. And I realize that some may not get it, but trying to explain it would just make it worse. Men got the idea of there being a speed, that of light, that is too fast for human comprehension from fleeting observations of their own thought processes. A man turned to a fellow passenger and said, "The nice thing about being aboard a train that has no announced destination is that you never feel totally lost or behind schedule, even when you are." And his seatmate, being from another level of awareness, shot him. Whilst wandering about in that undeveloped tract of land between nouns and verbs, a man thought, "There's nothing inherently wrong with criticism itself. It's just that when men engage in it, it makes them appear even dumber than they were before." It requires a truly expanded view of life to comprehend how it is that by catching a bat, a man becomes blind. Outside a transcendental hardware store was a man handing out cards which read, "If ordinary awareness is like water, then a heightened version would be like the adding of gelatin." And several who read and pondered this were momentarily frightened that they had perhaps in the past unwittingly consumed their own best mental potential along with their evening's jello. How to tell that you're a cow, sheep, or somewise collectively normal? You need the thoughts of others to inspire you. Daddy, is that why so few mystics have college degrees? No, son, it's that most of them are too dumb. Daddy? Yes, son. Sometimes talking to you can be, well, I know, son. Now come along or we'll be late. One morning, a man said to his thoughts, "And to what subject shall we give our attention this fine day?" To which they replied, "Why, the same ones we did yesterday, of course." Come Wednesday was a man who proposed the following question. If the mind is a noun, and if thoughts are a verb, then does anyone know what I was going to say? No. There's one man who says that he used to be interested in stuff like this, and says that he was also beginning to understand why it has such a limited appeal. But he says what seems to have finally led him away from it was when he couldn't help but start thinking that maybe all would-be mystics were simply people who, somehow or the other, thought they couldn't hack it in the real world. He further says that, and looking back on it now, he sees how his thinking this allowed him to walk away from any active involvement in attempting to expand his consciousness. And, as is so common in the human perspective, he is both satisfied and saddened by what he did. After hearing this, and perhaps momentarily experiencing something resembling compassion, local conditions said to the man, "Don't take it so hard. Most everyone else is as dumb as you are, and you're still going to die." And in a worse still world, read this one, the man would be relieved by such an assurance. Beyond all forms of analyzing, comparing, dissecting, and scrutinizing, past academic annotations and all artistic deconstruction, after all is said and done, Man's only legitimate criticism is contained in these 4 words. I don't like it. Okay, let's take a plainer look at the question. It's not that people are afraid to think outside the ordinary. It's a matter of them not being able to. I guess that's plain enough. Stopping work for a second to wipe the sweat from his eyes, a farmer said to the traveling salesman, "You think it's possible to compliment a cow sufficient to make them believe she can fly?" But on the other hand, the problem with being blunt with animals is that it doesn't accomplish anything. But, noted the salesman, neither does it with most humans. As regards collective belief systems, individual intelligence, and all that, a man with an ism has no gizm. The audience, for some of this, is even less than it is for most of it. After introducing himself to a certain mystic who seemed thereto indifferent, the man repeated his name, still to no apparent effect. Then, assuming he would catch the wise one's attention if he made known his intelligence, he gave his name again, but this time prefaced it with a full recounting of all his titles and academic background, to which the hazy one replied, "I fear I am not impressed with anyone's intelligence who must present publicly proof thereof." Bumper sticker on the rear of an intergalactic Tyrannosaurus. Those who would abandon the realm of their mind for something less certain are the kinds of people who will throw away their old running shoes just because they're worn out. And in the dust just below it, some wag had written, "Dig it." Having received no mail from his readers today, Mr. Advice Man issued this unilateral statement. Just as there are some humorous things that aren't funny, likewise are there some serious matters that aren't really all that, shall we say, serious. Yes, let's go ahead and say that. Yours, Mr. A.M. From our travel department, a Greyhound Earth's sightseer's tip. If you can't look in other people's eyes and realize how dumb they are, you're as dumb as they are. Have a nice trip. The mortal world continues to be divided into 2 main groups. Those who do not think about life enough for it to have much of an effect on them, on theirs, and those who think about it so much as for it to have almost too great a one. That's all right, Junior. We'll discuss the matter of justice once you get older and grow out of your larva stage. Although the liberation of the mind is a higher state of consciousness, a higher state of consciousness is not merely the liberation of the mind. Wherever Mary went, the Lamb went. Whenever you see a penthouse, you also find a basement. And wheresoever goeth Istanbul, Paris it drags along. And a man wrote Professor Enigma, "Dear Professor, what do you think?" And he replied, "Exactly." As he began to realize the ability to be neurally conscious apart from the everyday level of collective human intelligence, one man thought of it to himself as his alternative energy source. Local conditions told some people, "Look, in a closed system you've got to look after yourself." And someone asked, "But it seems like the system would." And conditions replied, "Hey, don't smart off." A man asked Columbus, "After you've seen the New World, isn't it hard to come back and live in your old hometown?" And Chris thought, "Only if you talk about it." As he sat writing his memoirs, Buddha thought, "Anything you say about the Enlightenment is actually a step away from it. But if you don't mention it at all, most people would never hear of it." "Daddy, is that why so few mystics have literary agents?" "No, son, it's due to the fact that most of them live too far from large metropolitan areas." "Thanks, Dad, I appreciate that." Most fathers would have given some sort of predictable reply that made sense. In delivering his daily commentary on past mystical musings, the head monk so addressed the neophytes. "'Tis been said by some that to enter into a new kingdom, a fresh state of understanding, that you must become as little children. But the truth is, dear ears, that once you've had that particular experience and thus cleaned up your consciousness, you've damn small choice in the matter of then becoming mentally a simpler, stripped-down version." Instead of going to school after he got growner, one kid asked his father if he could have his choice of either reading a lot just on his own or get a job with a septic tank company. Once you grasp the full potential of what common entertainment is and recognize its near all-inclusive pervasiveness, it gets kind of hard to keep all your balls in the air, at least with a straight face. Attention, passengers. The destination's the same, the maps change. In that the idea of liberation has oftentimes been used, that what has been called the enlightenment, the awakening, a higher level of executed consciousness, and etc. has been called liberation, liberation of the mind, liberation of consciousness, but a liberation. You can go with that into all sorts of allegorical areas, even at the public level. Religions can do it. Purveyors of athletic activities can even try to drag in such. The martial arts, the physically induced increase in certain neurotransmitters, dash high. That was all one term. But it has been called a liberation. And there was a newsarm tonight that pointed out that although you could say that a higher degree, let's say the enlightenment, make it easy, that the enlightenment would be the liberation of the mind, that the liberation of the mind itself is not the experience, that they are not reversible. One does not cover the other. It is not that the awakening or the enlightenment is merely or simply the liberation of the mind, because it's actually past it, which, beyond the fact that verbalization / human mentation is lineal, and therefore there always seems to go in some direction that seems to start somewhere and end somewhere. Even beyond that, there is a reason that all of the descriptions have to be that man starts somewhere, such as in a sorry, carnal, less than fully operational state, and that the whole idea is to move into some other location. Or, as I've been doing of late, turning the Orient Express into a mystical, mythical allegory, to say, well, you've got to start from Paris to ever get to Istanbul, as though it's an actual place. And I don't mean physically just a place, but as though it is an actual discrete, that there is a quantum distinction between this other state and your ordinary state. Yes, there is, but to call it a quantum, or to call it to a discrete distinction, still absolutely implies that it's a matter of some sort of degree, spatial degree, if not qualitative degree, within the same system, within the same structure. That is, getting to Istanbul is simply that you get right up, you've gone through the whole trip down there, you've even got across the Straits of Dardanelles, you're well into Turkey, and just out on the outskirts. Sorry, offhand, I don't know any of the suburbs of Istanbul, but you're out in New Haven, Marietta, Pasadena. You're out there, and it's as though getting into Istanbul is simply a matter of just keep on and on and on, and you keep cutting it up, and suddenly, there we are. Yes and no. Yes, 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 but no, 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 that it is actually comparable. To say, well, all it was an extension of the trip. I know. And the thing is, it's true. Had you not started out from Paris, had you not tried to get on that train, hang on that train, bully your way, bluff your way, bribe your way, sleep your way, to get that far, you wouldn't have gotten that far. But insofar as it to being a spatial, any three-dimensional, any comprehensible extension of getting into the outskirts and then getting into Istanbul is simply, well, now, there we are. No. But what's worthwhile between here and there? Going to fulfill my promise and go back to originality of thought. See, it would sound as though, in one sense, if you've been listening to some of my pictures, that the ordinary workings of the mind is almost Satan on a hot plate. They're all dressed up. It's like evil renamed. Like, boy, is that a waste of time. And I'm not the first one that you might have thought has ever pointed out that way, that the workings of the mind are just, come on. It's garbage. It's just uncontrollable. Well, I gave you a definition. For those that didn't particularly care for it, I defined the whole term for it that I know that everyone's interested in, a sorry waste of time. And I defined it quite clearly. It's simply what your mind's generally up to. That is a very specialized definition, because with everyone else it doesn't matter. Because people's minds, there's not that big a distinction between what's going on in the mind of a serial killer and our Secretary of State. Well, our Home Secretary here in Britain. There's not that big a difference. Men's minds have much more, their thoughts do, have much more in common than a thoughtful person at the public level, at the civil level, trying to stand aside and analyze, and that they look about and say, well, this man over here, this uneducated fellow, living in some rural area, no sophistication, no interest in arts, etc. The workings of his mind, I cannot read minds, but they are surely far removed, as evidenced by his behavior, if nothing else. The way he lives is far removed from that of myself, not being judgmental, but I came from an educated family. I have several graduate degrees. I teach at a university. His mind, obviously, his thoughts are involved with things far removed. Far removed. I mean, it's almost incomprehensible to me from the organs of my mind. No. That's one reason I keep picking out entertainment, for one thing. Look how common entertainment is. Look at how commonly it's shared. Now, you can find, I'm sure, that the head of the theology department at Princeton might insist, with some validity, that he has yet to see any of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, that he does not go to slasher movies or softcore porn. And I mean, for all I know, he's telling the truth. But insofar as his thought processes, his mind, the operation of the thoughts that go through his mind, as far as it being like alien, which they want to imply that they will say, and sometimes do these kind of gestures, although they stole them from me, and they go, I can't understand. He's driving past in his Volvo, in his tweed coat, and he turns to his wife, named Buffy or whatever it is, and they see lines going around the block for Friday the 13th, part 27, or whatever it is. And they see all these people, especially young people, they always like to point out and go, my, what is happening to the roughage in human in the... Let me clean that up. What evil forces does this portend for coming generations? How can they go on and be entertained with such as that? Again, I don't mean that he necessarily slips in with a fake nose and glasses on the weekend to see it, but entertainment is just a reflection of the common level of intelligence of people. And nowadays, I do not even have to limit it to Western Europe or to Africa or anywhere we happen to be. It is now almost worldwide, as witnessed by the continual clamor and running up the banners of planet Earth, the global village, and it's true, there's validity to that. But entertainment, I just keep using the full sense of the word. It's kind of electronic communication, all forms of entertainment. Notice, they are not that foreign that one man, who apparently is in a different position at city level, as witnessed by my example of the professor of theology at Princeton, and he may, and you understand there's nothing all that tricky about it, from his view, it is totally valid for him to say that the workings of his mind, what he thinks about he and his type, he and his peers, is almost from another world. It's almost to him, he would probably say, incomprehensible. How do people live, such as the uneducated, how do people live? What goes through their mind? What sort of trash, what sort of unnourishing, if not dangerous, neural activity goes through the people's minds that go out and spend money, stand in line and see all these movies and read the tabloids, etc. The difference is not that distinct. It's nothing I can prove, and it's nothing that has to be proved. All you got to do, you got your mind. You just use me as cheap entertainment. You just make me do your thinking and observing for you is all I do. Because if you can do any of this, if you've got any business being here, all that happens is I bring up stuff like this and you go, well, goddamn, that is right. Sure it's right. Of course, don't ever fool me. I say, did you disagree with me? And you went, well, certainly. And I go, prove it. And then you'll see. Everything that goes on before you get to Istanbul, even though, I recall now, going that last little inch from the outskirts of Istanbul into Istanbul itself, it is not really a spatial, a linear, a sequential. It is not in the same dimensions as what brought you there. It's something else. But remember where we were. Getting up to that point, what goes on in people's minds normally, that is everywhere outside of Istanbul, everywhere outside an individual executed, realized state of extraordinary consciousness. Everyone else, no matter what they do, no matter their education, no matter their sophistication, etc., they are more or less on the same plane, P-L-A-N-E, not having to do with aircraft. They're on the same train. They're on the same level. Apparently what they talk about is obviously different. Thus, and it's not just from the view of the Princeton professor, by the way, because I know that some of you would encourage me that we can get down and root with the best of them. We can take the guy's position that's out there down at Elmore's Black and Blue bar, and they see something on TV, and they suddenly, the set lightning hits the bar, and it switches over to a firing line or some PBS show, and there is a professor of theology discussing the latest thinkings in the philosophy of contemporaneous, non-revealed religious structures in this country. And there people of our ilk stand, no education, drinking beer. Just we're looking at it from another view, and they look at that, and if they had the wherewithal, if I was there, or you were there, we could get the wherewithal momentarily. We could turn to the guy next to us, burp, and say, you ever listen to stuff like that? I mean, just momentarily. And you look at them, and you think, well, it's a human being like us. And you think, what goes through a man's mind that he lives a life standing there going blah, 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 and talking about, conflicting theologies and, about God says this, and, and now you're having a beer and you go, trying to feel up the waitress when she goes by, and you just been looking at a guy's new truck, important stuff, and you think, and you're talking about things of interest, things of immediate interest that you can please the body, you can please your existence. Beer nuts, pig feet, the waitress, trucks, and you could look at the man talking, and he's supposed to be important. And from that view, the wolf pack is always arranged the correct way harmoniously. If such people walked in, and we're not too big hormonal wimps, even the guys at the bar, the big guys named Bubba and etc., would sort of cowl just before a guy who walked in with a suit that had any physical presence at all, which, for all I know, there could be a professor of theology somewhere who does. So, but if you understand, I'm not taking the position, not portraying the point of this uneducated, more physical man down the bar looking at momentarily this figure on TV. I'm not saying that he would be making total light of it. They would treat it somewhat of the same manner, a similar manner as when their position reversed of him punching his butt and say, what do people think of? I mean, what goes through somebody's mind that they do all that all the time, if that's what they think? And yet, all I was saying was, if that kind of guy walked through the door, somebody that they knew was, they're better in the ordinary sense. More education, probably, well, without any doubt, more money, higher social position. And if you had any physical presence, they would, physically. They would speak to the man, they would lick his hand, they would pay homage, they would submit if he just walked through the door and looked around. They would, like any good wolf will, they would go. It's not the kind of thing that the professor ought to hang around a long time, because it's pretty fleeting. Because they're in a position, getting way off the subject, but as you would say, what else is old? It's not purely hormonal, that is, it's not purely physical. It is now in part neural, and there is no counterpart out in the jungle. That is, if a gorilla walks into, that they've never seen before, walks into a pack, and they all understand hormonally, which they understand everything. Smell, sight, the physical presence. He just walks in, and it could be a pack that they got their own leaders. But if this one shows more physical presence, if he is more the alpha gorilla, the alpha male gorilla, the rest of them will immediately go. They will submit. And it very likely will not change, not immediately. If he hangs around and decides to stay with them for a while, it may get to the point that one of the prior leaders of the pack will begin to challenge him. But the thing is, when you have hormonally, when you have physically established your authority, you're in no great danger. Not immediately. And all I was pointing out, there is no counterpart in the animal world, and the rest of this planet, than man, because this professor, if you understand what I'm saying, will walk into this bar that even the sheriff of the county doesn't even like to come in this bar, unless he has to, you understand? And here's the guys I'm talking about that just saw this professor of theology, or economics, let's say theology, and they go, what in the world? And they sort of make light of him, like, how can, is that their life? You know, what goes through their mind? They can't imagine that that's his life. And suddenly through the door comes someone of that same sort, tweed coat and his Volvo out there, not a truck. But he has just a little physical presence. You understand, they would, if for no other reason, in a sense, neurally, it's not completely, but just trust me right quick, they would just look and see and realize this guy could buy and sell probably their whole county. They just recognize he has class, he has social position, and they would, for a while, momentarily at least, they would submit. They would do this. I just want you to see that things are not either or. That things are not a one-way street. There's not a combat that one person wins, even theoretically, from afar. That is, the professor did not originally, when he was seeing or reading about, or let's say he's watching TV and they're doing a documentary on the rural life, contemporary rural life as it still is, and they pick up Mississippi or the Delta of Louisiana, and they show this, and the professor says, how can people live like that? It's not that just from afar he is making sport and attacking. It is not simply that. But his thinking is, he is driven to, is he cannot conceive of how different their minds must be for them to live like that. Because to him, that's the only way, that's the only reason they would live like that, is something up here. And of course that turns into the classic part of the fuel that runs civilization. That continues to come out, that those that normally label politically liberal, which is just to say that they're normally more neurally driven than their counterparts, they're the ones who continually say that the ills of society can be cured by education. Because to them, you understand, it's not true. It's not true, it's just irrelevant. But to them, when they, to use my example, this professor looks at this documentary and he's seen these people, and it goes on for an hour, showing these people living like that, and you know, just a rambunctious, uncivil life, and just drunk and always in trouble and wrecking their truck and no money, and they don't even seem to care. And he thinks, how can they live like that? And the only thing he can conceive of, that sort of person is, the only way they can live like that is because of what goes through their mind. That is, it's what goes through their mind creates their behavior. And if we could alter, if we could improve what they think about, then it just follows. Perforce, their life would improve. They would be more civilized. But from the other hand, my guy back there that accidentally when the lightning switches it over to a PBS channel, and he's looking at a professor of theology rambling on about something, the guy here, the uncivilized, he looks at it And he might not ever think to say it, but again, if I was standing there, if you and I were standing there next to him, and I said, "God, have you ever thought, I'm not sure even what he's talking about. I'm talking to this guy at the bar." And I said, "But do you ever wonder, people like that, what goes on in their mind? We're staying here talking about football, baseball, screwing, drinking, and trucks, and local high school football team. And we know what to talk about. We just, we talk, and it's interesting, We got a whole field of things that we can talk about that's of personal interest and has something to do with our life, But do you ever think people like that? They got big houses living up north somewhere, and look how he's dressed, and he's educated. But do you ever think, what goes through his mind? What does he think about? You're saying compared to us. What does he think about? How does he live? Does he walk around thinking all that kind of highfalutin, weird, vague stuff all the time? How can he live like that? What kind of sense does life make? Does anybody remember what the point of this was? Is this a quiz? I don't know. Why do you ask? That's another old one. It is that, as strange as it sounds, I'm not going to push toward anything resembling evidence any further than that. Everywhere between Paris and Istanbul, everywhere between where all the collective, that is, all sane, ordinary people are born genetically, where you suddenly find yourself, you're suddenly sitting there at the table, the cards have been dealt, there's your hand. They were there before you got there. You sit there and you look, and everybody's hand is more or less the same. That there is not the distinction that the ordinary minds imagine between the uneducated lower class mind and the higher one. There's not that much difference. It is not a matter of any useful distinction. So, we're back to, if I say that the workings of the mind are just almost, excuse me, if I make light, if I in some way seem to stick my tongue out at the ordinary workings of the mind, then you're left with the valid question of, well, what do you do? If I'm not going to, speaking on your behalf, if you say, well, if I'm not going to undertake some physical regimen, if I'm not going to adopt some ritualistic, some apparent, mystical, ritualistic based approach, if I'm not going to pray, if I'm not going to worship somebody, if I'm not going to sit at somebody's feet and try to catch some of his spliced over charisma in some way, if I'm not going to starve myself into enlightenment, if I'm not going to gorge myself into awakening, then what am I going to do? And of course I've already stepped into it by saying that no matter what you attempt to do anyway, the final step, the achievement itself, the experience itself is here. I'm not saying that you cannot, by some appearances, let's just say, fast yourself into it. It's not true, but by all appearances, people have done it. Or that you cannot get up and whirl and dance yourself into it. Or you cannot stand in one position until you atrophy and it takes you to it. I won't say it can't be done, but what happens is not awakening. And suddenly that you're now, you make an anorexic look overweight. You start down that point and suddenly you go, I see it. Then what's down here, what is visible, is not the experience. It is still in here. So you're still left, on your behalf I'll ask it, that you can say, well, if all that be true, if I operate on that assumption, that basis, then what am I going to do with my mind between here and there? Besides, of course, listen to you. All right, here's a little story. I gave this much thought. For many years I pondered, how could I describe this? I paced the floor incessantly at night. I stayed awake. I tortured myself. I underwent great spiritual hardships. Many demons plagued me, wondering how to describe this and what to call it. Well, I was thinking about it before we started taping. That's what happened. What can you call it? I've already called it for you. Originality of thought. And I was going to say, we'll use that, but assuming that eventually I'll think up a better one. That's not it. Eventually I'll use another one. And you'll think, well, that's even better. If we're somewhere along the same right-of-way. If we're all somewhere along the same sort of track. Originality of thought. And as I pointed out last time, it is not a change of mind. It is not a reversal of positions in any particular field. And I also point out that it cannot actually be described any more than the experience itself, which, looked at from the position that one man pointed out tonight, is always common, or as is so common, as he put it, being an understater. He said, as is so common with the ordinary human perception, things seem to be both good and bad. It's paraphrasing what he had done, his observation. So the fact that originality of thought, or any workable, extraordinary effort, same as the experience itself, cannot actually be described, therein lies, at first you might say, a frustration. It's not an irritation, like, well, what the hell? But I also point out it is a kind of totally unexpected, useful, profitable surprise, because it is, once you understand it, it's like, here it is, this box, this little present. Let's just use my example. And I say, well, here it is. The thing is originality of thought. And I can't really describe it much, but it's originality of thought. That will get you in this day and time, right now, seeing where all of you more or less are, let's say. And I say, it'll get you there faster, more efficiently, from Paris right up to Istanbul. At least somewhere past the Straits, somewhere into Turkey itself. Originality of thought, but I can't tell you much of what it is. So I give you that box, and there you sit and you think, well, if that's it, you know, if you were being sort of humorous to yourself, you could think, well, thanks a lot. You know, that really cleared it up. But if you learn how to open it, it's like you open a present, and out of the box comes something larger than your whole conception of reality. There it is, you start out, and you think, well, there's nothing in there. Because I said, well, I can't even describe what it is. And so you think, well, what a pain. What a non-explanatory explanation. What a non-usable method. What an empty, if I say gift. Here it is. Here's what it is. Originality of thought. And you look like, and? I go, well, you know, I can't tell you more, and I'll leave. And you think, well, what a thankless gift. What a hapless, useless present I must have. And yet if you get it open, out of it springs the impossible. Because out of it, what springs is an emptiness, a thing large enough to swallow up the entire world in which you live. You let out a genie that can eat the room that you're in. You understand? Which, you know, can't be done. I thought maybe I'd bring it to a more local picture. It devours, it swallows immediately your whole universe, which something inside the system cannot swallow the system, right? Don't bet upon it. I know it seems that way when you're on the train. It seems that way everywhere, I'll admit, outside the real city limits of Istanbul. Originality of thought. I was going to give you another way tonight to try and look at it. How about in operation? How about we move up to it like that solitary crab in that famous folk song. You could identify originality of thought non-verbally on your own in one glaring manner, and that is it rectifies all that the mind sees in life backwards and upside down. It corrects it. What do you say after you've sent the best? And after you've sent an expensive Hallmark, are you going to follow it up the next day with some little cheap Valentine that you got out of a box of candy? Free? If anyone remembers, some nights back, I gave it just kind of a glancing brief menu of originality of thought, the things that it would do, without repeating them individually tonight. if you just consider originality of thought as the one thing that will correct all of the misperceptions of the mind, and specifically, it corrects all that the mind sees as upside down and backwards. If it was an ordinary mind hearing this and wanted to do some kind of close contact intellectual tango, it could say, well, now wait, you're back to the same thing you just said it is not, of correcting something that's upside down and backwards, which would be a change of view, a change of attitude. No. No, nothing specific. I don't have anything specific to tell you that the mind has perceived as being upside down and backwards. I have nothing to tell you that there is no form, there is no blanket map or attempted corrected schedule to say, well, everyone here who believes that the laissez-faire form of economics is the proper one, would you please raise your hand? And everyone who did, I said, well, I'm sorry. That alone will stop you. It just will. It will stop you from any further pursuit of any higher state of consciousness. You simply must understand that the only kind of economics that will work with humans, we're talking about humans, is a kind of collective, read state, but collectively controlled, a planned economy. That's it. Now, I'm just sorry if you can't see that. You're just going to have to forget all this free market stuff. I don't know where you got it, but you're just going to have to drop it. If in some way I could push that upon you and you go, okay, all right. See, that's what you would think as being, if you were trying to be argumentative with my original statement, that originality of thought is the correction. It is the sole correction of whatever the mind sees in life as being backwards and upside down. But see, that is non-specific. And it is not. If a mind said otherwise, beyond my injecting myself playing the other person's part, an ordinary mind, if the ordinary mind went, well, are you speaking about economics? No. Are you speaking about politics? No. Well, what is it that you mean specifically the mind might have upside down or backwards? Professor Enigma answered, exactly. I mean, if you're going to quote somebody, quote the best. Because the guy wrote him. You didn't forget that. He wrote Professor Enigma. I had it there in black and white. And he asked him, dear professor, what do you think? And the professor answered, didn't hesitate. Exactly. There is no specifics to it. If there are specifics to it, it is not originality of thought. It would be the attempt, or it would be the turning about of one's opinion, of one's view. You have to first realize, I can make it a little simpler, surely. You have to first, you come to this realization on your own. When I say you first must, you understand it's a figure of popcorn. The conductor left that for you. Well, they're not serving a full meal between here. I was going to mention about, since everybody likes to hear about the train going through Transylvania, about Prince Dracula's. Well, they don't stop there anymore, but here we go. Unless you're Catholic. No, I'll leave out all the rest of that. Thank you. Well, there were just almost an endless supply of stuff. There's something about Transylvania and religion, I guess. Originality of thought is not to cure anything specific. You have to realize, as I was about to say, you will come to the realization that everything that the collective thinks, everything at any given time, at any given place, that you look around right now, figuratively and literally, but you look around at what is the prevailing sense of reality, which is what people think. The entire scenario, the entire tome of what is being thought and accepted in reality is to varying degrees upside down and backwards. But it's not, unless you, well, it is not a matter that this particular thing is upside down And therefore, if I get more conscious, or if I get more perceptive, I will turn it around and straighten it up. No, it will still be backwards. That is not originality of thought. The mind sees it, but what it sees is always either backwards or upside down to varying degrees. It sees reality, it does not see life. It can look point blank into the obviousness of what life is and deny it. If it's more intelligent, has some degrees, it will not just deny it, it will explain why it's so deniable. It will explain why this cannot be true. That is part of the purpose of education with the ordinary, is to be able to, in a more forceful, coherent manner, deny to varying degrees the obvious, which makes the obvious, which makes life, from a neural view, you understand, is already, partially at least, turned upside down, reversed. It's simply to call up, down, this, that, to varying degrees. And it doesn't have to be that dogmatic and that clear cut, but it's if you state, well, such and such is true, look how people act. And there's only one thing that would cause that, and that would be such and such. According to the degree of education, the person will. That's what determines the long pause between this ordinary person going, do you realize what causes people to do so-and-so is simply blah, blah, blah. I'll try a master's degree. No. Let me explain that. I'll tell you what causes so-and-so people to do so-and-so is such and such. Doctors. Let me respond to that. Have you read Dr. So-and-so's latest paper on that? It is all. It is not a conspiracy and it is not stupidity unless you're smart enough to realize it is a conspiracy of stupidity. The ordinary mind, not only of everyone else out there, but yours too, unless you're real sharp, but yours too, does not understand what's going on in life. This cannot come as a shock. If it is, then bluntness is just going to scare the shit out of you. This cannot come as a total shock. I know it comes as an ebbing and flowing shock. That is, you can only think about it sometimes. That just periodically it strikes you in a non-aggressive and a non-hostile manner that you just look around and you realize nobody has any idea. Nobody. I mean, you understand, nobody. There's no exception. It's all the way from Princeton down to Bruno's Black and Blue Bar down in Tuscaloosa. But all the way between the Pope, between all rabbis, between all philosophers, between all truck drivers, you look out upon the landscape. With no hostility, no aggression, and you, of course, it's nonverbal. There's no way you can do it. But you just simply realize nobody knows what's going on. Nobody. There's no exception. It's just of varying degrees of stupidity. Of varying degrees, and by stupidity, I mean varying degrees of how much they will attempt to remove themselves, their thinking, from the bluntness of life. It is a kind of cushion. It is an accelerating agent into the civilizing of man, because the more civil you are up here, the more you will deny that which is obvious in man. That's part of the process. That in one sense, there's no doubt the Harvard professor is more intelligent. You can say, well, there's no doubt. He understands more about the workings of modern day life on this planet than this guy with a 5th grade education, this shrimper down in Mississippi. Yes, except for this, on another way, on another level, on the same level in another direction. The shrimper down there, you can point out the obviousness of what life is to him, he'll go, yeah, and walk off. You say that to the professor, you point out the same thing, he'll go, here we go again. I say he had a doctor's, right? You point out to him, he'll go, No. Let me explain. Let me point out something to you. That is part of being civilized. That is part of the purpose of, quote, education, is it more and more removes the person's mind from the blunt confrontation with what life is. That's the way it's supposed to be. You understand? Somebody attempting to do this, you're on nobody's side. And I don't mean just physically. You're not down there with the shrimpers and the bricklayers of Mississippi, and you're not up there with the tea sippers and the Volvo drivers in New Jersey. You're not on anybody's side. You're not a liberal. You're not a conservative. You don't take up anybody's position. You understand that there is no operational distinction between any of it. And it's not that it's not that anything specific is wrong, upside down or backwards. Hence, the absolute invalidity of all criticism, all hostility, all sense of irony. There's nothing specifically backwards or upside down. But originality of thought will correct what the mind perceives as being either upside down or backwards, which is another way of saying wrong. But it's not just wrong. When the mind, we're not talking about a personal extended state of consciousness, or the enlightenment, that sort of. The mind cannot perceive life directly. Comparably, your body can. I mean, it's meaningless, but it's not that mystical. To drink coffee that's too hot, to stick your finger on a hot plate, that is a direct perception of life. Not reality, that's a direct perception of life. Eating when you're hungry, to digest everything about the body, if we could, for the sake of argument, discreetly separate from the mind. An animal, well, how about that? Your dog directly perceives life. Big deal. So what? It's just neither here nor there. Part of the mind's purpose is to remove that direct perception. It is a kind of cushioning. It is a kind of civil avoirdupois. It's a kind of cushioning. But it removes a man. It has to. It's not that it's wrong. Originality of thought, even though I said it cannot be explained directly, which may not stop me in a previous or in a future night, but what it does, one way you can identify it is, it corrects all of your mistaken mental impressions. And I'm sorry you may not like it if you're an ordinary person, but there's no way to weasel out of that. I mean, good thing the tape's over, so you can't argue with me. But if you go home and you think, well, wait a minute, wait, he got himself caught again, because it will correct all mental misperceptions you have. And don't say, well, which ones do you think I have? Exactly. Yeah, but I want to know if it's going to cure them. First, I can't cure that which I don't know is mislaid. I mean, I cannot cure an ill in me until I know it. So which ones is it that I'm wrong about? May I write to you? Could I sit down and have a talk with you and tell you some of my real strongly held opinions and my philosophy of life, and then you sort of hint to me, at least point out which ones are wrong. You did tell people that, I get $100,000 per personal interview. Unless you ask dumb questions, then it's $1 million. So do it to yourself and save yourself a few bucks. Do it to yourself. It's not specifics. There's no way out. Originality of thought can be identified in you that it cures all mental flaws that you currently have. All mental flaws that you have. I wash my hands of it. Pancho Pilate would have been proud of me. It's yours. Like I'm yelling at people.